Hi Dragonflies, welcome back to Dragonfly Spirit Studio. I'm Lynn Bauer. This is the project Paint Along for the first project in my online watercolor skies and clouds workshop. If you are encountering this video first, I want to just quickly tell you that this is not a standalone video. There are a lot of other materials available on the website to support this video because I know you'll be coming to this from a lot of different backgrounds. Some of you will be fairly new to watercolor, others may have been painting skies and clouds for a long time and just looking for a few extra tips. To get all the course goodies, go to my website at www.dragonflyspiritstudio.com and follow the links for Learn and then Watercolor Skies and Clouds. There are templates and reference photos and handouts with cheat sheet reminders. All the project lessons are on the website in order. There's information on supplies and materials. For each project in this course, there'll be a project video that's about the design and planning of the project painting, and then a paint-along video that's the actual execution of that plan. And then there'll be some preliminary videos with essential skills that you really need to know how to do for the project, and some supplemental videos that aren't essential but things that you might have questions about or little handy tips and tricks. And then some follow-up videos that help you learn how to take what you just learned in the project and extend it to paintings of your own. Now, if you just arrived at this video and you haven't seen all of that other stuff, you don't have to run off right now. You can go access that material later when you're ready to start painting. It's perfectly fine to start. In fact, it's probably a good place to start by just getting an overview, skimming through the project Paint Along at least, or watching the whole video. And then you'll know which pieces you want to plug in to help you do the whole painting. So let's take a look at the painting that we're going to be doing in Project 1. Just to recap briefly from the planning and design video, this is the photo that was the initial inspiration for our project. And to be honest, I chose this photo because it has one of the challenges that's fairly common in painting skies. There's a graded wash that begins and ends with two colors that are complements, and this can produce a grayed area in the middle if we're not careful. We also had this wider angle view which gave us the idea to make the upper portion of our wash a little darker so that we could include a scattering of stars. We came up with this arrangement of picture elements, substituting a sailboat on a lake for the cell tower just for fun. This template is available sized for a quarter sheet of watercolor paper on our class page under Learn and then Watercolor Skies and Clouds. At the end of the project video, you'll wind up with something like this. If you're fairly new to watercolor or you'd just like to have a simpler project, here are several things that you can do to simplify that will still allow you to learn the techniques that will be used from this project in later projects in this workshop. You could leave out the moon and/or the stars, or instead of masking them, you could add them later with an opaque white. You could leave out the orange and yellow at the horizon and simply do the entire painting in shades of blue. You could leave out the sailboat, or you could change the foreground to something simpler like just a tree line or a city skyline. Feel free to adapt this project in any way you like to suit your aesthetic sense or to just make it a little bit easier to manage. The important technique that you'll need from this project to carry forward into other videos in this course is the goof-proof graded wash. What is the goof-proof graded wash? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the idea behind the goof-proof graded wash is that we only have to deal with one difficulty at a time, and we achieve this by using glazing. We're going to lay each of our colors one wash at a time, and that doesn't necessarily mean one pigment at a time. It could be that you've mixed a color from two others, say an orange that's mixed from a red and a yellow, but we won't try to go from blue to orange in one wash. We'll lay our orange wash and then our blue wash, or vice versa. And then to deal with the problem that many people have with watercolor washes being streaky or uneven, we're going to pre-wet the paper for each wash so that our colors will have the softest blend possible. And we're going to use gravity to help us even out the wash. Now, as a rule of thumb, it works well to do your yellows first, then your reds and oranges, then any staining blues, greens, or violets, and then any sedimentary blues, greens, or violets. But that could be changed. We are going to use that sequence in this painting, but you can change it if there's a good reason. We're going to start a little bit light with each of our washes and not let it be too gray at first, because it's always easy to darken a color by adding another wash on top or to gray it down, but it's really hard to go the other direction. And we'll use the idea of having transition colors between complementary colors. When we're adding colors in a narrow band, we'll tip the paper sideways so that any excess color runs off the page instead of areas that we don't want to have it go into. So all of this is designed to have us just deal with one difficulty in each wash. Okay, so now I'm ready to demonstrate for you the goof-proof graded wash. Now at this point, I have already stretched my paper and masked the moon and the stars and transferred my drawing. If you need help with any of those steps, please go to our class page. There are videos to show you how to do each one of those things before you attempt the project. But in this video, we're going to jump right in at the point where we've already got those things done. The template on our class page is for a quarter sheet of watercolor paper. I'm going to be working larger so that you can see a little more easily what I'm doing. Because I don't have stretchers exactly the right size to scale up a quarter sheet of watercolor paper proportionally, I'm just going to cover the portion that I don't need with masking tape. Another thing you can do to improve the evenness of your washes and help your paint flow more easily is to add oxgall. I use a synthetic oxgall because it smells a little less than the regular stuff, which is kind of stinky. And in a 12-ounce container, I usually use about 15 drops. But you can just add it to each of your cups of wash. For the first wash, I'm going to use a sort of a neutral yellow, neither very warm nor cool. I'm using M. Graham's Azo Yellow, but you don't need to run out and get the same pigments I'm using. I'm just telling you that because not all monitors show color the same way, so what you're seeing on the screen might not be an accurate reflection of what I'm using. Any sort of mid-range, not too warm, not too cool yellow will work just fine. I am notoriously bad about starting a large wash without everything that I need right where I can get to it. So I actually have a little checklist for myself to make sure that I'm really ready to start, and you can download a copy for yourself on our class page. I'm going to go through it just really quickly here. Yes, our paper is stretched, our drawings transferred, all the small lights are masked. I have something on the table for drips. This is kind of a messy technique, so we're going to be running water all over the place. I have my wash ready to go. My wash brushes are rinsed and damp and ready, easy to reach. I have clean water and clean brush on the other side for pre-wetting. I have something to catch the drips, a towel in my case. I have something to prop my board up. I'm going to stand up. Relax, breathe, take a cue from Bruce Lee, and be like water. Okay, that might be a little hokey, but it really does work for me to remind me to lay my washes in a relaxed, flowing manner. I want to let the brush glide lightly over the surface. I'm using the brush to coax the water, not to push the paint or water around. I'm holding my brush almost horizontally. If you hold it too vertically, you'll put a lot of pressure on the bristles, and later on when we have paint on the page that we're pre-wetting, we may move that paint if we put too much pressure. So hold your brush lightly and let it glide over the surface. Now that I've brushed water over the entire sheet, I'm going to pick everything up and tip it and try to distribute the water so that I have an even sheen of water over the entire page. Before I start to lay my wash, I also want to look and see if there are any droplets sitting on the tape on the outside that might break free and run down and dilute the paint where we don't want them to. If you're working on gator boards, you'll need to do this all the way around. If you're working on stretchers, you probably won't need to worry about it. I'm going to tip the board sideways for this first wash because I want to confine this yellow primarily to a fairly narrow band close to the horizon. So this way any excess will run off the side instead of up or down the page. So first I'm going to lay in the full strength wash right around the horizon, and it begins to spread because the paper is wet, but mostly down to the side. Now we'll dilute it a little bit and do a few more passes with a diluted wash, and then maybe even rinse the brush and use almost clear water right up there at the top. Now mop up the drips on the edge, and I'm going to use gravity to help me run the wash just as far up the page as I want it and no farther. So I tip it back and forth, side to side. I've got a little dry spot down here, so I'm going to wet that area so the paint will flow. And this takes a little time sometimes, so be patient. If you have drips on the edge, I like to wipe those up so they don't sneak over the edge, and there's another little dry spot. I know this is taking a little while, but for this video I want you to see a couple of these in real time so that you understand that you do need to maybe hold the board at a particular angle for a while until the paint runs as far as you want it to run. You can't really rush this. Gravity happens at its own pace. If you have drips along the side, just go ahead and wipe those up. That's looking pretty good. I want to point out that anything that happens right along the edge here, don't have to worry about that too much because that last ½ inch or so is going to go underneath the mat, or if you mount paintings the way I do, it'll get trimmed off. So that's wash one, and it's time to set it aside and let it dry. So how do you know when it's really dry enough to continue? So this feels dry, but I know it's not, and here's how I know. Hear that sound? Now I'm gonna go get it completely dry, and I will let you hear what it sounds like when it's dry. Now it's dry. You want it to sound like a drum, kind of musical. Okay, so now we're ready for our second wash, and you may notice that the moon has changed, and that's because I had a recording problem with the previous second wash, didn't record. So I had to start over, and I forgot which technique of the three that I used for masking the moon the last time. But everything else is the same as what you just saw. I have a mixture here of Graham Azo Yellow and Holbein Bright Rose for my orange. And again, you don't need to use the same pigments I'm using. Use colors from your palette that give you an orange that you find pleasing. Now, I'm going to do my little checklist, make sure I have everything I need. Now I'm going to stand up, take a deep breath and relax, and wet the entire page. And this time I think I'm going to leave the page flat. It was drier than I expected in my studio last time, so the top edge started to dry. The water ran down faster than I wanted it to. And you may need to experiment a little bit with what gives you the best results for wetting the paper. You can still even things out at the end, but if you can get it on evenly at the beginning, then there's less time spent running the water around after you've wet the page. And just a reminder, make sure you wipe up the drips that are on the tape, especially those of you who are working on Gatorboard, so they don't break free and run across the page just at the wrong time. All right, that looks pretty good. I think we're ready to lay our orange wash. Notice that I always stir my washes. Some of the pigments settle out, so make sure to stir them up after they've been sitting for a little while. And now we're going to kind of do the same thing we did with the yellow. Add our orange mostly in a band around the middle. And yeah, it looks streaky right now, but don't freak out. It'll all be okay. And then with the orange, I'm not going to go quite as far up and down the page as I did with the yellow. I'm going to go ahead and start diluting it now. And wipe up the drips. And now it's time to let gravity do its magic. Okay, that looks pretty good. It's time to let it dry, and then we'll come back and add another layer. While that layer's drying, I want to talk to you a little bit about the issue of using a blow dryer to speed things up. It's perfectly fine to do that, but I want to point out that you need to keep your blow dryer moving all the time so that you don't get spots that are drying too fast. And when you're working on stretchers or Gatorboard, it's a good idea to spend some extra time going around the edges. Water tends to collect along the staples or under the stretcher bars, so the goal is to get it all to dry evenly, so spend some extra time on the edges. Okay, so now wash 2 is dry and we're ready to do wash 3, and I just want to point out that you might feel like that this orange is not as intense as you'd like, and you can always come back later and add more orange. So it's hard to judge this when you don't have anything else on the page, so I like to wait because I can always do that later. Now for our blue wash, I'm going to start with a wash that is pure phthalocyanine blue, which is way too bright. But we don't want to go quite as gray as the photograph. Remember, we were going to push our colors a little bit. So I need to add some of the complement, which is orange. I'm going to use my brush, sort of like an eyedropper, to transfer some of my orange wash into my blue. I know it looks like I'm putting a lot in there, but phthalo blue is a very strong blue, so I can put in a lot of orange before I have much of an effect. You see, it's still pretty bright. Still pretty bright. Okay, I think that will work. And again, you don't have to match my colors. Do what looks good to you. Use your own taste as to how gray you'd like that blue to be. As before, we'll start by getting the page uniformly wet. I've covered up my orange wash, but I think I'm going to put it completely out of the way just so I can't accidentally go into the wrong wash. And I'm going to begin flat again because I don't want this wash to start moving too fast. But otherwise, this is pretty much like what you would do with any wash, except instead of having a bead, the wash just begins slowly moving because the paper surface is wet. Now again, letting gravity help us redistribute that color so that it's nice and even. I have a few places here where the color is not quite blending and I don't have enough to get it to move. And as long as everything is still soaking wet like this, no dry areas at all, I can stick in a little extra color if I've got some places and I can't seem to get the color to flow there. I can still add some right now. That's not a problem as long as nothing has started to dry. And sometimes I like to make these brush strokes a little zigzag instead of straight, just in case there was maybe a little bit of pigment in the brush that was making those streaky lines. And now we'll go back to our gravity method of rearranging things with a little more color on the page. The most likely reason why I was having that problem and couldn't get the color to move all the way up the page is that I probably didn't have my paper really uniformly wet before I started my wash. Sometimes I rush a little bit. So this is the goof-proof wash, not the rush-proof wash. So make sure you take the time to get that nice even sheen of water, and that'll help you move the color more easily. All right, time to let that dry. Okay, this is looking pretty good, but I feel like I would like to start building a little bit of those darker values in the upper part of the sky. And so I am going to do another layer of wash 3. I'm going to do exactly the same color. I've already got enough wash ready. I'm just going to do exactly the same thing one more time. Well, I lied, not exactly the same thing. It was a little awkward for me to reach last time, so I'm just going to turn the page upside down so that the area where I'm laying my wash is closer to me. You can do this anytime you like. There's nothing that says that you have to apply the paint the same way that the painting is going to be hanging on the wall. So as always, we begin by wetting the entire sheet and running that water around to get a uniform film of water on the surface. And now I'm going to use the exact same mixture we just used, and I'm just going to add some more of it. And this time I think I'm going to mostly put the color right up here near the top and then use gravity to move it down the page, because I just really want to add a little bit darker values along the top of this painting. You may have noticed that that little crescent moon tends to capture some of the wash and you have to tip it back out. That's one reason why leaving the crescent moon out might simplify this if you're just learning how to do this process and you want to have less to think about. All right, once again, time to let that wash dry. All right, at this point, I'm really pretty happy with the sky. I'm going to do one more wash, and this one, like the last one, is completely optional. I just wanted to follow up on our idea that we were going to make the very top of this a little darker so the stars would stand out a little bit more. So I have taken our previous wash and diluted it a bit, and now I'm adding a bit more red and some cobalt blue because I love granulation and I want to get a little bit of granulation into the sky. And since this is our very last wash, I don't have to worry too much about the sedimentary color moving because I won't be re-wetting this again after this wash. This will be my last wash in the sky, so this is the time for that sedimentary color. So once again, I'm going to begin by wetting the page. And here we go with our very last wash, which is a blue that's slightly grayer than the one that we used before and has a little bit of sedimentary color. And as before, I'm going to just add the color right up here along the top and then use gravity to move it farther down the page. As you're watching this on the video, keep in mind that I'm editing out probably 3/4 of the time involved in doing this. You can do it faster if you want to, but I find that rushing it doesn't lead to good results, and you wind up just having to do the project over. So I take my time and let gravity operate on its own pace, and then you get a lovely smooth wash. And here's where we are after that wash dried, and I'm going to call it done. I don't know about you, but I would probably not be able to get as even a transition as this laying a wash in a traditional manner, just starting at the top with one color and working my way down. But using this technique, you can creep up on it, make adjustments, go back. If you wanted more orange or more blue, you could go in and add that now and pretty much manipulate it to your heart's content. One caution, before you remove the mask, make sure that everything is really completely dry. Sometimes what happens is people will dry their painting with a hairdryer and they touch the surface and they think that everything is dry. And in fact, there's still moisture in the inner layers of the paper. So then when you go to remove the mask, it tears because those inner layers are still soft and wet and they separate there. So you need to make sure it's dry all the way through before you take off the mask. I usually try to leave it overnight if I can, but if not, dry it for a while, come back, dry it again. Make sure it's really dry before you try to take the mask off. The rest of this painting uses standard watercolor techniques, except I want to show you how I'm going to handle the transition right at the horizon when I start adding color to the water. Now that I have sedimentary colors on the page, I don't want to risk wetting the entire sky and possibly streaking my wash, so I'm only going to wet this lower portion where the water is going to be. Even though the horizon line will be underneath my tree line, our eyes are really good at picking up hard edges, so I'm going to use a misting spray bottle to mist that edge and soften it. And I don't want to spray too close, and I'm holding the bottle vertically, not horizontally, so that the mist sort of falls onto the page. That way I won't risk lifting off any color with my spray bottle. Here's a close look. You see it's quite wet at the bottom and then it just blends into this mist at the horizon line. I've mixed up some orange and sort of grayed blue puddles on my palette, and now I'm just going to drop these colors into that wet area sort of randomly, playing around, having fun. No one really knows what the ripples look like in this water surface, so I can kind of just throw things in wherever I want, keeping in mind that in the end, this should all be a darker value and probably a little grayer value than the sky. Along the horizon, there will be a reflection and shadowing from the tree line, so I'm going to put some darker colors in there and let them start bleeding down. So let's have a look at what that horizon line looks like close up. As you can see, it's just a very nice, soft, feathery edge, and so that'll disappear very easily into our tree line. This trick will come in handy in other parts of the course as well. We'll finish the painting with standard watercolor brushwork, just keeping in mind that in order to have color harmony, we should mix all our other colors using the pigments that we've already used in our sky. I'm going to paint my tree line just by sort of wiggling my brush around here to let there be some gaps in these foreground trees. And I'll just work my way across, varying my colors a little bit each time I dip my brush in the water and letting my tree line, my tree tops get a little lower as I get farther away along this tree line. And then I'm going to go ahead and soften that lower edge and just let those colors run down and start creating the beginnings of what will be the reflections and shadows in the water. And we'll drop in a little bit of darker shadowing. And then drop in some of our darker shadows and ripple patterns in the water. When you get down to your sailboat, remember this is sort of a secondary area of interest. The primary area of interest was the sky, so don't get too detailed with your sailboat. It's mostly a silhouette. And I'm just darkening some of the water values around that sailboat too to help merge it into the environment. I don't want it to jump out too much. This painting isn't about the sailboat, that's another painting. For those of you who are a little new to watercolor, I just want to point out that a flat brush is a great way to make things like a mast. Just hold it vertically and touch just the tips of the bristles going up in a line where you want your straight line. Great for masts, telephone poles, fence posts, all kinds of man-made objects. Makes a nice kind of broken line. So I'm pretty happy with where things are at this point, except that I feel like it would help this painting to darken the foreground water just a bit and help throw more of the attention up into the light in the sky. So I'm going to wet this lower area again and just float in some of my darker blue-gray. I just want to mute some of this foreground light and push the attention up into the sky. So there we are. I think we should call it done. There's a great temptation to get in and fiddle with stuff in the foreground, but remember this was about the sky, not about the foreground. One of those things that people ask a lot of times about watercolor is how do you know when it's done? Well, it can help to go back to your original intentions for the painting and remind yourself, oh yes, this was crescent moon in a pre-dawn sky, not sailboat. In this painting, we want the sky to be the star of the show, and the sailboat is supporting cast, so we're not going to do more to the sailboat, give it more airtime, and let it upstage the star of the show. So there you go, Project 1 of the Watercolor Skies and Clouds workshop. This introduced the basic technique of the goof-proof wash, where we lay things in layers, glazing each color in by itself. I did 5 washes. You could get by with 3 if you wanted to, or even 2. Remember, you can simplify this project by leaving out the moon and stars or using opaque to paint them. You can leave out the sailboat. You can simplify the foreground. So the most important part is to get the technique of the wash, which we'll use again and again and again throughout the course. Remember, you can get all the course supporting materials on my website, dragonflyspiritstudio.com, by following the links for Learn and then Watercolor Skies and Clouds. I expect to be releasing a new project in this workshop every couple of months. And after this project video goes out, there will also be some follow-on videos about fun things you can do with what you've already learned. So keep your eyes open for those things. I hope you have a lot of fun with Project 1, and I hope to see you back for Project 2. Happy painting!